currently, with the issues we're grappling with in the country, as we welcome you, Mr. Msimang, to the panel, one of the bigger issues is that our politics have been covered with a lot of lies from when you're standing from far, people labeling each other, people throwing mud unnecessarily, instead of focusing on facts. And most of the times they play the person and not the issue. Just as an opening remark from you, how important is truth in politics?
It is absolutely essential. It's very difficult for me to start these conversations without making reference to Oliver Tambo, who used to say in the difficult old days, the purpose of the struggle is to remove the apartheid, racist apartheid regime and replace it with a democratic and ethical system of government. He would not omit ethical. So ethics and truth go hand in hand. You know, with the Zondo commissions now going on, with the other commissions taking place, it becomes very, very clear that something about the ethics has been dropped. And I think that's to a very large extent why we are experiencing such difficulties.
Where was it dropped?
You know, it got dropped when we found it quite normal that a person who had committed the egregious crime of being found in a relationship with a young woman, and we thought it was quite okay for them to become a president, for instance. Talking ethics. We're not talking about whether people rape each other or not. An older person in an organization having a relationship with another person, that's a very unequal relationship. Besides, I know in some companies, people like saying, you must never dip your toes in the company ink. Tolerating that and going on to make such a person your president says something about your how seriously you take the ethical, the moral aspect of politics.
Generally, as South Africans, are we behaving in a way that shows respect for ethics and integrity across the board in politics? And we're just focusing on politics currently, because if you look at what's been happening currently, you wonder if our politicians are aware of the word ethics.
In the last few years, I think ever since the Constitutional Court pronounced on the importance of ethics, at least there is a sense that government should behave ethically. But otherwise, I would say that to agree with Mr. Msimang on just one issue, that we did drop the ball on ethics, but where I think we dropped the ball personally is not one person. It's just generally we lowered the standard for public office by saying as long as you've not been pronounced guilty of a crime by a court of law, you can hold public office. That means we decided that Section 195 of the Constitution doesn't matter, and Section 96 doesn't matter, and Section 136, because those are the ones that lay down ethical standards. And in other words, we are supposed to be a democracy that's founded on ethical governance.
The other side of the coin, when you talk about truth, is transparency. There's been all this issue for political parties, for example, and there's a bill to say we must say where our funding is coming from, who's funding us. We've been through this CR17 issue currently where people are saying, but look at people who are funding, where they're going to benefit or not, where there's an issue or not. So transparency has a role, Fasiha, to play in politics?
I think it's also an interesting thing, and I've been sitting here reflecting about it. Of course, transparency is a fundamental thing. But what we see by and large, and I'm also starting to see in practice, is that things don't happen and politicians don't jump unless they know there's going to be consequences. It's not just a culture, I think, of dishonesty or lack of integrity. There's also a culture of knowing that there isn't going to be consequences that are there, which I think is starting to slowly change. I think it is starting to slowly change. But because there isn't this idea that I'm going to be held accountable, I'll sort of continue however I think I should do it and constantly tell myself I'm doing the right thing, which is a fundamental problem I'm seeing internally within politics, that there isn't this idea of, sure, externally there's this idea of holding accountable, but internally there's this echo chamber of trying to tell each other we're doing the right thing, we keep doing the right thing, when in actual fact, you see that outside is a fundamentally different picture.
Judge Pillay, you've got an international exposure. You travel a lot. People look at South Africa from far. They see certain things. I just want to bring you in here because there must be consequences of a lack of truth and transparency in our politics currently. There has to be.
Well, I'm glad you asked me the question because, I was the judge and president of the Rwanda Tribunal, and we sentenced to life imprisonment political leaders, military leaders, the prime minister, and so on. We sentenced the media, the heads of the media, just for spreading that kind of propaganda. So it's an extreme example of how lies and propaganda can lead to disastrous consequences. We're not there yet. We don't want to get to that brink. I'm thinking of the many times I address students here in South Africa on corruption. And invariably some bright spark in that audience, not you, Faisal, would say, why don't you blame white minority capital? And you see how that bit of manipulated words spread across the country because it was uttered by the leader. It was contrived for him by his Gupta friends and the PRO office in London. And yet it was taken as truism here. So when hate speech and propaganda and corruption are the activities of leaders, unfortunately, it permeates right through.
And sometimes one gets a sense that leaders would use carefully chosen and amplified rhetoric, for example, on social media to obfuscate matters and shut out the truth.
I do agree with you. It's sad, though, that when leaders are doing that, they're thinking transactionally, and that I want to get out of this trouble and I'm going to say these things. We do know about the white monopoly capital campaign, but it wasn't just about white monopoly capital. It was about, we started an anti-white campaign. That campaign has grown into an anti-white campaign. It may have been started to try and divert attention from the state capture investigation. That's what the London PR case revealed. But the reality is it has further divided a divided nation, because the Constitution did not unite us. It gave us a basis for healing the divisions of the past. So we were still in the process of healing now this. It has also made us forget what is important and what is not. And I suppose that was the intention.
How do we regain that optimism the country felt post-1994? Because from what you are saying, it looks like reconciliation is now far away or it's been eroded. Mr. Msima?
Difficult to say how it should be done, but absolutely it has to be done, because without it, there is not going to be any stable nation in South Africa. One sees an emergence, not a resurgence, of racism from parties that have traditionally been very non-racist. When the Freedom Charter was drawn up, at a time when the tide was very much against the people who are in the majority now, people declared that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. I tell you, the number of people who question that now is amazing. I think if it's being questioned by people who are not political, because we have abandoned politics, by the way. I don't mean that people should have been taught how to become ANC. Politics is about knowing how we came to be where we are today as a nation, what was the past, and how do we hope to go forward. But I was then saying that people have become intolerant. I tell you, it may not be declared openly, but there are kind of first-class citizens. I think I qualify for that. Africans.
Yes.
I think there's a word that was disappearing of minorities. I thought they were Democrats and not Democrats. But this is gaining currency and finding acceptance, and somebody wonders, no, that one couldn't be president yet, he's colored, and so on.
Now, Fasiha, you mentioned political intolerance is rising, you mentioned racism is rising, and that gets accompanied by a lack of respect. I mean, you look at what's the scene that happens sometimes in our National Assembly, Fasiha, and I just wonder, as a millennial, what do you think when you see that?
I don't know what a post-94 optimism is, or looks or feels like. And by and large, we're now in the majority of the population of the country. I don't think that we need to be aiming to recreate that optimism. I think we need to be honest about the failures of the current society and the current government, the current space, in order for us to create a society that is more fair and more equal. So what I don't want us to do is harp on what that feeling was like. What I want us to do is to create a different future. And I'm saying that because there's no way we can go back to what that feeling was. I don't know what it was. I have never felt it. But I do think that we need to create a different future instead of harping back on where we were stuck before.
Very interesting thing. Create a different future. Yes, Judge Pillay?
You know, I had the privilege of working with former President Motlanthe on this parliamentary panel. Well, we held 9 public hearings. Thousands of people turned up, and they were in all the rural areas plus urban areas. Of course, they were very angry, full of grief about the deprivations of apartheid, very disillusioned with politicians. But at the end of it, the majority at each session believed in South Africa. They believed that discussions are valuable, and they wanted politicians to come there to them and consult them. So I see optimism in that. And let me say, to pick up on your point, how unacceptable it is that the question time in Parliament is not taken seriously by those to whom the questions are put, the members of the executive. That is a very serious business. When questions are being asked by parliamentarians, that's the public that's asking the questions. And, you know, I come to the court system. It's a long process to look through what he said, she said, as to who's speaking the truth. And therefore, we have to develop public accountability systems through dialogue.
I just want to say in support of Fasiha a little bit that there is collateral value in adversity. We were healing, but we're healing without proper reconciliation, because there can be no reconciliation without justice. And we have continued with economic injustice, with social injustice. Yes, we were in the process of healing the divisions of the past, but this ugly campaign reminded us that we've been peppering over cracks when it comes to a racially stratified economy and social relations in this country.
So there's still a lot to be done. Faith?
Then I'm going to actually bring in here Professor Dinyeko Maluleke. Come stand next to me. Don't be shy. And when you're listening to what's been actually said in the panel, one would actually understand that, picking up from what Professor Thuli Madonsela was saying, that maybe it's our fault, the fact that we have lowered the standard when it comes to assuming public office, where then accountability is not necessarily seen as something that needs to be done, and where we find parliamentarians not even taking question time very seriously. That whose fault is that? The accountability has been erased and the standard has been lowered.
I think we must take joint accountability for this. It's not good enough that we point fingers at the politicians, because we as civil society have a role to hold them to account. I'm not so sure that we have spoken enough about how civil society and citizens have lowered their own standard of holding the leaders to account. I also think that the idea of truth is a noble one. Maybe it should be in the plural. We should be talking about truths, because there are many truths. One type of truth that we haven't spoken about is a person. Uyinene is a truth. Mgcineni Noki is a truth. Fezeka Kuzwayo is a truth. Anin Boysen is a truth. Andris Tatani is a truth. What are those truths? So we can't just talk intellectual, and I'm an intellectual, I shouldn't be saying that, about the truth, when in fact there are walking truths that say so much, of whom we forget very quickly. I mean, we're now going through a Karabo Mokoena moment again, and just waiting for the next one.
Thanks very much for that. I'm going to bring in Saftu Zwelinzima-Vavi to come and join me as well. I mean, I'm just picking up from what the professor was saying, that they are walking truths. Is it because we do not necessarily want to recognize those truths? or the fact that actually we're dealing with a frame of mind of guilt, that should we acknowledge those truths, then we have to introspect as society?
I think we replaced solidarity immediately after 1994 by a system of me, myself, my family, to hell with everybody else. We have removed even the pretense of a rainbow nation. The rainbow nation was quickly reinterpreted to mean Alexander will be in Alex. They will face their squalor, their poverty, their violence and their crime. And Santin will enjoy their opulence. At this moment, we are reaching the rock bottom based on the issues of class division. There is no more solidarity even between the black middle class and the working class, the marginalized, the underclass, and the poorest of the poor. They are on their own. The middle class is on their own, looking upstairs, not downstairs. It's worse between black and white. It's worse between labor and capital. So we are in a struggle that is not ending, based on this me and not them. Ubuntu in that process was killed. We are now facing the xenophobic violence. We're facing criminality. We're facing increased levels of regionalism and ethnicity. But again, you can easily put all of those things into compartments. The Jeppe hostel residents have particular concerns about how the 25 years of democracy have put them. And guys in the other side of the town relate to that issue of what we call the squeeze, the squeezing of the black African majority by the system 25 years down the line. That generates anger and hopelessness. And that's why this discussion is so important about how do we build a future that goes back to what we thought the struggle was about, solidarity. I think solidarity is gone.
It's a very interesting point that you're speaking about solidarity, because then it's going to be the question around, Dan, what's the role of the church? What's the role of religion? What's the role of faith in being able to inculcate and entrench this issue of solidarity? And Reverend, I'm going to ask you to just to join me in this side and just to really shed some light, because we're speaking about solidarity. I'm also speaking about issues around ethics, that in fact ethics and truth walk hand in hand. But ethics and truth and ethics, from what I understand, that is the role of the church to uphold and to keep into account the ethics and the moral high ground of society. So where does the church play a role now when it comes to this issue around solidarity and creating Ubuntu?
Thank you very much, Faith. There's no doubt from us, from where we stand, that any society that builds itself around lies soon enough will collapse, because lies do not sustain a healthy society. It keeps itself happy for a moment, but in truth, it collapses soon enough. And therefore, our quest to find the truth, and truths has been referred to, is an urgent task, because our society itself is beginning to crumble because we've allowed lies to take over. The second thing I want to say about ethics and what you refer to as about the role of the church, we and I personally am not trying to understand why those generate lies lie, because I know why they lie. They lie to gain advantage or whatever else they want to gain advantage upon. What I'm interested in is how we as society allow lies to proliferate, how we allow ourselves to be duped by people we know will lie. And for me, one of the key things that comes out is we lived in what I call a tribalized identity. We find our own corner, whatever that corner is, and whoever speaks from that corner, we do not interrogate their truthfulness, because they are in our corner. And anybody outside of that corner is immediately a name called to be a liar, whatever thing we do. One of the things, therefore, we need to do, in my view and our view, is to break down this tribalized existence. We need to find a South African identity that allows us to tell each other the truth, even if the truth is unpalatable. We need to face the truth. As much as we love South Africa, We need to be able to tell South Africa the truth that South Africa has mortgaged truth and ethics for access to power and material gain. The truth is that we have found ourselves in a space where politicians are not interested in truth, they're interested in lies, because through lies get access to power. And we have allowed them to live like that because we get the bits of things that fall from their table. And then we think you get material gain for that. We need to elevate the character of who the persons are and who we are to the center of life. And when we do that, we deal with the things that Babu Vavi talks about living in solidarity and living in accountability. That goes beyond facts. It goes to who benefits in the structure of society. And those who are in the periphery of society needs to be placed at the center, because when they're at the center, truth will triumph all the time.
Dan, some strong comments that are coming out from our guests this evening, obviously looking at the various roles and different civil organizations actually play in being able to decipher this truth, this lies, and the way politics really becomes the cornerstone of it all.
Thank you, Faith. I think we're going to have to bring in the panel here. I saw some of them scribbling. A couple of things. Human solidarity comes up that, as Mr. Vavi was saying, we've lost that. And using examples like the recent xenophobic attacks and criminality. But amongst ourselves as South Africans, the haves and the have-nots, we are not there for one another. And that was a kind of a future that possibly we could build. Fasiha, you're talking about a fair and equal kind of society. Does that resonate with you?
I think we all have this idea of a vision for South Africa. And it's really important because as much as I'm sitting here and I think just in life, it's very easy to be disillusioned. And it's very easy to be bleak about the current state of the country, about the future of the country. But in many ways, as young people, we're going to be living in this country for far longer than many of the people around us in that sense. And so for me, it's more of a thing of how do we activate young people? How do we get young people more involved? And not just necessarily in mainstream politics. One of the things I always say when I speak at panels or speak in spaces where there are young people, find something that you love or something that you're good at and use that to contribute to society. If you're a sports fanatic, find a way to coach that particular sporting team, etc., etc. So what I think we need to do is, it's more about, in my opinion, activating societies, activating young people to be more part of society and contributing and positively doing that, than it is just about sitting around with the same people, trying to come up with solutions with the same sorts of ideas. And that's, I think, the power of young people, that we do look at things differently, right? As millennials, people always say to us, and I know there's some young people in the crowd, people will say to us, yes, your instant gratification is a huge problem. You young people are so impatient. You guys don't know what struggle is. You don't know, etc., etc. And one of my easiest responses is that impatience is what makes us great. Because it's that very impatience that forced us to not accept the status quo. It's that very thing that said, during fees must fall. Why must the fee increment be so high? Actually, we know there's money in the system. Why can't we have free education? So in many ways, I think we need to also stop looking so antagonistically at different groups, particularly around age, and look at how we can each bring something else and something different to the table, and how that can contribute to the future of South Africa.
Professor?
To your contribution, Mr. Vavi, my answer would be yes and no. We've lost some of our human solidarity, and we haven't lost all of it. Human solidarity is the essence of Ubuntu. I addressed students recently, and I spoke about how in the trade union movement we used to say an injury to one is an injury to all. But that's the foundation of all thriving societies. But we haven't lost it. When I see how rural people live, there's still human solidarity. When I see people in the township sharing the little that they have, there's still human solidarity. Students entered the fray about insourcing, just out of sheer compassion for the workers who work at universities who can't even bring their own children to study at these universities because they're not regarded as staff. But where we have lost it is human solidarity as a foundation of all policy decision. That when we pass a law, when we pass a policy as government, we always have to ask ourselves, of the 56 million South Africans, who's going to benefit, who's not going to benefit, who's going to be excluded, whose life will be more harsher and harder because of this law or policy. And that's something that, as part of the chair and as part of something we call an M plan for social justice, we're trying to correct.
Ms. Msing, I want to bring you in there, something that was said by the Reverend there, that we allow people to lie to us. We allow lies to proliferate because we benefit from that. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, the truth is that governance and government continues really because civil society has not reacted sufficiently strongly enough. There's always been a hope that the promises that are being made will be fulfilled. And so you get people who clearly are inherently not competent to govern. They are not competent because the way they get into the governance position is corrupt. It's not through a process that is fair and just. And we hope that they will sort these things out. The truth is, we've got to catch the bull by the horn. I think a lot of us, it's not a generational thing, a lot of people in government today, we should find a way of excusing them and getting the very many people. I agree, by the way, very, very much that there are lots of good people in South Africa. I sat and listened 3 weeks ago to a discussion on community lands that are being robbed now. The traditional chiefs, so-called, have been given by our government to make deals, not in consultation always with the people. And the people are taking these matters up very, very seriously. You would be amazed at how much they know about these things, but they are being disempowered by the current system.
Civil society activism, Faith?
So we want to bring in the South African Jewish Board of Deputies into this conversation. I mean, looking at this element of truth and seeing what's been taking place in the country, one wonders, number one, the international perspective, but also the issue around isolation and being part of it, part of the solution, not feeling isolated within a country that everybody's got every right to live in.
Correct. And I think that I'd like to just pick up, we spoke earlier around the South Africa belongs to all who live in it. A lot of minority communities in South Africa are starting to feel maybe that they're not welcome, they're not part of the society. And I think a lot of that is being fueled by the social media and a lot of the inaccuracies on the social media. And I think we're starting to see that now with the xenophobia and the Afrophobia that's arisen. It's very, very difficult to be able to see through what is being put out, but particularly in the social media, but not only the social media, I think the traditional media as well. And I know that we'll get to that later. But I think it's becoming harder and harder for us to differentiate between what is true and what is not true. And unfortunately, those kind of inaccuracies are starting to fuel anger, hurt, hate in our society.
These are very real conversations, Dan, and very real perspectives in terms of people that are living in a society. And perhaps the issue around inclusivity comes into fold, and at the expense of not marginalizing those that are living with us as well.
Business is in the business of making a profit. Otherwise, they won't be there. But they have to respect human rights while doing so.
It is not true that they're just focused only on profits. It is absolutely and patently not true.